I appreciate all of you coming out. We have a wonderful panel of also volunteers that have come from some great distances in some cases to be with you this evening and to be able to share their expertise and to keep you really current with what's going on in the area of being a public official today, which is such an important and valuable job. We do have some things we need to take care of in terms of housekeeping first. The most important, of course, always is that the restrooms are located outside the door and to your left if you need to access them. In addition to that, we are asking, and I don't think that's going to be a problem with this group, but we do ask you if you are in conversation at some point during the presentation to keep your voices down so everyone in the back of the room can be heard or can hear the presenters up here. So we're going to start and kick right off because we're on a tight timeline. Our structure for this evening is a panel structure, which means each panelist will be talking for approximately 20 minutes, at which time we hope, and we gave you some paper on the table if you didn't bring some with you, to make some notes. And then at the end of all of the panelists, we'll do the Q&A session. Otherwise, we'll never get to all the panelists. And so we're going to kick off this evening with David Gennadi. David is coming to us from the State Ethics Commission, and he is the Public Education and Commissions Division Chief. And I've talked to David a couple times on the phone and asked him some questions. I find him to be very, very knowledgeable on this subject. And of course, the whole concept of ethics and conflict of interest is critical to public officials. So without further ado.
Thank you for asking the Ethics Commission to come out and participate in a very worthwhile program. You all are giving up all of your time to volunteer to attend this training session, and we want to make it as meaningful as possible. I'm going to stand just so that the people in the back can see me. As Shirley said, my name is David Gennadi. I'm the Chief of the Public Education and Communications Division of the State Ethics Commission, and you're going to get my fast speed presentation. I usually go out and conduct a 90-minute presentation on the requirements of the conflict of interest, so I will condense that down to 20 minutes, and I've tailored my PowerPoint. So we'll take questions, as Shirley indicated, at the end of the presentation, just to allow all of the speakers ample time to present their information. So for my part, it's just a discussion on what are our legal obligations once we become public employees. And then the first question usually is, am I a public employee? And the answer is yes. If you are performing services for a government agency, then you're a public employee subject to the conflict of interest law. It doesn't matter whether you're full-time or part-time. It doesn't matter whether you're paid or not. It doesn't matter whether you're elected or appointed. If you're performing services, you're a public employee, and we have a conflict of interest law in Massachusetts that all of our state, county, and municipal employees are required to comply with. The conflict of interest law is all about maintaining integrity in the work that government employees do, maintaining confidence that the public has a right to expect from its public employees. So from its highest level view, the conflict of interest law requires that you serve the public interest, and in doing that, it sets restrictions. Basically, your public responsibilities, your responsibilities on the job, whenever some component of your private life is affected by what you do, when there is an intersection between your public responsibilities and your private interests, that's a conflict of interest. It doesn't mean it violates the state's conflict of interest law. What it does mean is that there are compliance rules that we must observe. Conflicts basically break down into two buckets. Bucket one is financial interest conflicts. You are not allowed to do your public job if what you will do will affect your financial interests, the financial interests of certain family members, the financial interest of businesses that you either own or operate or are privately employed by. We call those nepotism situations. You know, it's the rule that says you as a school committee member cannot hire your sibling to work for the school department. You have to stay out of matters if certain financial interests are affected. That's bucket one. Bucket two is everything else. Every other component of your private life that's not a financial interest impact is still a conflict of interest. Classic example, can you award a contract to your friend's company. They're not a family member, you have no financial interest in the matter, but the matter affects some component of your private life, your friend. The reason those are conflicts of interest because you are required to serve the public interest. And what that means is you're always looking at what is in the best interest of the board you serve, the mission of your board or committee or agency. And whenever you're poised to do your job and some component of your private life is affected, those situations create what we call appearances of conflict of interest. And sometimes when people talk about the conflict of interest law, they say, public employees have to avoid even the appearance of a conflict of interest. The appearance of a conflict of interest occurs anytime you're poised to do your job and some component of your private life is going to be affected because people, the public, looking at the circumstance will wonder whether you're going to do your job the way you're supposed to, whether you're going to act on the matter objectively, consider the matters on the merits, or whether instead, because the issue affects some component of your private life, somebody's going to get preferential treatment. Your judgment could be impaired. Your decision-making could be altered. So what is an outside or private interest for conflict law purposes? And the short answer is any component of your private life, your life off the public job. Who you are, who your family members are, who your friends are, what outside business interests you might have, what church you might affiliate with, it doesn't matter. But anytime you're poised to do your job and some component of your private life is going to be affected, think conflict of interest. The red flag should go up, and then take the time to find out what the compliance rules are. I work for the State Ethics Commission. The State Ethics Commission is a 5-member board. The State Ethics Commission has full authority under law to determine what is and what is not a conflict of interest. The Ethics Commission is a law enforcement agency. We are one of the so-called state watchdog agencies. But enforcement of the conflict law, which is what we can do, is sort of the smallest piece of what we do. Most of what we do involves education, and I want you to consider the Ethics Commission as a resource for you to tap into whenever there are any potential questions on the conflict of interest law. The reason being, the law contains 29 different sections. Some of them are fairly intuitive, others are very complicated. And because the Ethics Commission is a law enforcement agency, it can impose civil penalties for significant violations of up to $10,000. It's important that public employees know that we are there, we are a resource, and to call us so that they don't guess, because the potential when you guess about what the compliance rules are is that you might guess wrong. And if you do guess wrong and it results in a significant violation of the conflict law, that'll be very unfortunate. So at the Ethics Commission, we provide legal advice, confidential legal advice, we enforce the statutes, and we provide educational services. Anyone who's a public employee, anyone who's performing services for a state, county, or municipal agency is required to observe the conflict of interest law and all of its provisions. So the services we provide, legal advice, education, if you think that somebody is violating the conflict law, you can call our office and file a complaint if you want. The reason that might be an option is because we can't tell people whether somebody has or will violate the conflict of interest law. We are required by law to keep matters confidential. We can't confirm or deny whether we've received any complaints or whether we're conducting investigations. And so people call the office all the time and they want to know whether we're looking at a particular matter, whether the commission plans to take action on a matter, and we can't talk about those things. The option, if somebody believes that someone has violated the conflict law but they can't find out for certain, is to just report the matter to our enforcement division. Those folks will resolve it. Most of the work our enforcement division does remains confidential permanently. Just to give you some context, we take in over 800 complaints, 800 to 1,200 complaints in a given year. The commission takes enforcement action only in 1 to 2 dozen cases a year. The commission, for the most part, is involved in educating public employees on the requirements of the law. If there are egregious violations where there's willful misconduct, self-dealing, unlawful enrichment, we gave advice and somebody didn't follow the advice, Those are the circumstances under which the Commission will pursue public enforcement action. But for the majority of the work our Enforcement Division does, it's reviewing matters, determining whether there are issues under the conflict law, and then confidentially resolving those matters. In other words, if somebody has violated the law, but there's an opportunity to get them into compliance with the law, we do that confidentially. Okay. The Conflict of Interest Law since 2009 contains education requirements. I hope this is a review for everyone. Within 30 days of your appointment or election to a public position, you have to complete an online training program. You also have to acknowledge that you received a document, the Summary of the Conflict of Interest Law for municipal employees. And those are regular compliance requirements, because at some point in time, the government realized, the powers that be realized, that it's not sufficient to just appoint someone or elect someone to a board, ask them to comply with these complex provisions of law without giving them any education. You know, government agencies need to do more to make sure that their employees can comply with all relevant laws that relate to how they perform their duties. And so since 2009, we all have to complete the online training program and the summary of the law. So let me briefly talk about the conflict of interest law restrictions. There are 3 restrictions that apply to us while we're performing our duties. Gift restriction rules, and the basic gift restriction rules are: you cannot, as a public employee, accept anything of value from anyone if what they're offering constitutes a bribe. Bribes are prohibited. Also, gifts that are worth $50 or more and given in connection with some official business that the public employee has with the giver are prohibited. And then finally, gifts that are worth $50 or more and given because of someone's official position are restricted. Now, when I say gifts, it's a loose translation to any item of value in any way, shape, or form conveyed from one person to another. It could be somebody paying for a meal. It could be use of someone's personal property. It could be a gift. It could be a floral bouquet or what have you. But for the most part, we deal with payment of expenses, payment of meals, wining and dining kinds of situations. The Conflict of Interest Law establishes gift restriction rules on public employees because we are required to serve the public interest. And gift giving can undermine that process. Gift giving undermines the confidence that the public has a right to expect of public employees, because people will wonder if a public employee is accepting a gift from someone and they're also making important decisions concerning that person. Are they deciding matters on the merits, or are they making decisions favorable to the gift giver because of the receipt of some gift? Undermines confidence in government. There's also a section on nepotism and self-dealing. Let me see, okay. Gifts worth less than $50, because I've mentioned that gifts worth $50 or more, the term is substantial value in the statute, means anything that's worth $50 or more, that are given for or because of some official act or given because of official position, are restricted. We cannot accept those, any sort of gift, if our public position is implicated, or if there is a nexus between the gift giver and the public employee, some official business going on. What about gifts worth less than $50? The conflict law doesn't restrict us from accepting gifts worth less than $50, but those situations will create what we call appearance problems. Because whenever a public employee accepts a gift worth less than $50, and they will then continue to have dealings with the gift giver, again, the public will question whether the public employee's judgment has been impaired. Will they continue to decide matters the way they're supposed to, or whether they will start making different decisions because they received a gift from someone? So those are the basic gift restriction rules. Items of value that are worth less than $50 can be accepted, but understand any gifts or items of value from the same source can be aggregated by the Commission. And we use a 365-day window. So if somebody buys you lunch worth $20, but then they do it 3 times in a 6-month period, the total value is going to be more than $50. It then becomes problematic under the Conflict of Interest Law. Financial interest conflicts that I discussed, we call those nepotism and self-dealing kinds of situations. Basically, you cannot do your job if certain financial interests are affected. In our world at the Ethics Commission, the terms abstain and recuse reflect that public employees, when faced with financial interest conflicts, step back from the matter. They're abstaining from further participation. Now, whose financial interests implicate the nepotism section? Yours, your immediate family members, a business partner, any business organization that you own or operate or that employs you privately. If you're negotiating for employment with someone, if the committee is poised to award a contract to a company and you also happen to be applying for a position with that company, as a committee member, you cannot do your job if what you will do will affect that company's financial interest. Why? Public employees are not allowed to use their public positions to leverage any potential job opportunities. People will wonder whether the public employee is acting in the public interest or is instead attempting to leverage future job opportunities. So when you're on a board or committee and situations come up, you've got to think about how the conflict law will apply. And these are the topics: hiring, supervising, family members, personnel issues, budgets, contracts, negotiation for employment, collective bargaining. If you're on a school committee and you have a sibling or a child who's a teacher in the school department, can you participate in budget matters? The answer is, it depends. You can't participate in any part of the budget where salaries are involved, salaries for teachers specifically. So when the budget goes to be approved, can you vote on the budget? Well, if it's a budget as a whole, the answer is no. But if it's line itemed, so that you can vote on the budget, provided that you can abstain on the line item for salaries, you're going to be okay doing that. Collective bargaining. The committee might be involved in collective bargaining with 5 different groups, but if you have an immediate family member who is a teacher, you have to stay out of the collective bargaining process for teachers, but you can otherwise participate in the collective bargaining for everyone else. We have an exemption, a regulatory exemption on nepotism for school committee members and members of charter school boards of trustees, because school committee members and boards of trustees frequently deal with policy matters that might affect their own financial interests. If I'm on the school committee and I have a child in the district and the school committee is set to deal with bus transportation fees, and that's a matter that's going to affect my financial interest because my children take the bus, that's a nepotism issue under the conflict law. But in school committee situations, typically you'll have multiple members of the committee with children in the district. In other words, there'll be so many members who have financial interest conflicts, the committee can't do its job. So the commission promulgated a regulation that says, as to general fees or general policy matters, even if the financial interests of the school committee members are affected, they can still participate, but they have to file a written disclosure with the school department or the town or city clerk, depending on how the school is set up. For regional school districts, it's considered an independent municipal entity. So a school committee member would file a conflict of interest law disclosure with the superintendent's office, and they would keep those disclosures as public records. The conflict of interest law requires disclosure under several sections. Anytime a public employee encounters a conflict of interest, where the law permits them to continue to do their job, at a minimum, they will be able to do their job provided that they first disclose the nature of the conflict. Because the conflict of interest law requires transparency. We have to put the cards on the table. And anytime a disclosure is required, it has to be in writing. It has to be a statement that contains all relevant facts that constitute the conflict. It has to be filed in a specific way. For elected school committee members in a city or town district, it would be filed with the city or town clerk. For regional school districts, you file it with the superintendent's office, with the business office, or what have you, whoever the keeper of the records happens to be. And those disclosures are public records. And reporters and members of the public, they contact public agencies all the time because they learn of potential conflicts of interest and they want to know whether somebody has filed a disclosure of their private connection to a matter. Okay, there is a provision, not in the conflict law, but it governs what we call the rule of necessity. What happens if a board, if you're on a board of selectmen, an elected board, and the board can't put a quorum together to decide a matter because too many of the members have nepotism situations, what do? Well, there's a provision that was articulated in court decisions called the rule of necessity. A basic premise is that a public body needs to be able to get its business done. And if there is an impediment, such as the board can't put a quorum together because people have nepotism type conflict issues going, they can invoke the rule of necessity. That is available to elected boards only. Because in the nepotism section of the conflict law, there is a provision that says if an appointed board member or appointed public employee encounters a nepotism situation, they're required to step back from the matter. But there is a provision that allows them to file a written disclosure with their appointing authority, and their appointing authority can then decide what to do. And the appointing authority can take responsibility for the matter and handle it, or they can assign some other person to handle the matter. But the third thing they can do is waive the statute. If they determine it's in the best interest of the agency, if they make a determination that despite that public employee having a financial interest conflict, the integrity of their services won't be affected, the appointing authority can say you can handle it. They make that determination on your disclosure, and the effect of that determination waives the statutory requirements. So for appointed boards, the rule of necessity is not available because you can pursue the disclosure determination process through your appointing authority. But for elected boards, the example I use is, say you're an elected planning board member and there are 5 members, and Walmart has just filed an application to put a big box store in, and it's going to be right next door to your property, and it's the planning board that will decide that matter. Can you participate if your property is going to be affected? No, if you're in a butter. What happens if 2 of your fellow board members also live in your neighborhood and they're also abutters? Pretty soon the planning board cannot decide this important matter because 3 of the 5 members have financial interest conflicts. The rule of necessity is available to these boards. We have an advisory on our website governing the use of the rule of necessity. It can only be used after the board obtains legal advice, either from town council, school department council, or the ethics commission, that the use of the rule is appropriate. Shirley, how much time do I have? Okay, good. Sometimes I get long-winded, I'm sorry. As I said, my program's usually 90 minutes, so I can go. Okay, that's the nepotism section of the law. There's also the code of conduct section. Now, I said it breaks down into 2 buckets, financial interest conflicts and everything else. Well, the everything else falls into what we call the code of conduct section of the conflict law. It deals with appearances of conflict. The code of conduct section says you as a public employee cannot act in a manner in which a reasonable person, knowing all of the circumstances, could conclude that you would act with bias. In other words, based on the circumstances, somebody could legitimately question whether your judgment could be impaired. And whenever that circumstance presents, you can still do your job, but you have to file the written disclosure first. But there's a second bucket, a second component to the code of conduct which governs improper use of public position. Because you might ask, so you're telling me I can decide matters affecting my golfing buddy provided I file a disclosure? And the answer is yes, but what if I want to not decide matters the way I normally would and instead try to show them preferential treatment? Well, then it falls into what we call an improper use of public position. You don't get to disclose away that section of the conflict of interest law. We cannot, under any circumstances, use our positions to secure any unwarranted benefits for ourselves or others. And an unwarranted benefit would be something that is a benefit, but the person isn't entitled to receive it. The example I use is, say I work for the school department and I issue a permit. And it could be use of facilities, it could be anything. But in order to get a permit from me, everybody has to fill out an application and then pay a permit fee. And let's say the permit fee is $100 because the term substantial value, something that's worth $50 or more, appears in that section of the law. And anybody that wants a permit from me has to follow those 2 steps. And then one day, my Uncle Harry comes in and he wants a permit, and I tell him, Uncle Harry, today's your lucky day. Today you get the friends and family discount. Fill out the application, but you don't have to pay the fee. In that circumstance, I've improperly used my public position. I have used my position to secure for someone I'm connected to privately an unwarranted privilege of substantial value that is not available to similarly situated individuals. Why is it an unwarranted privilege? Because, as we all understand, working for public agencies, we don't get to make up the rules as we go along. Everything we do is guided by something. Policies, procedures, statutes, regulations. We are required to decide similar matters similarly. And whenever a public employee deviates from the normal rules that guide what they do, and as a result of that deviation, someone that they're connected to, like my Uncle Harry, benefits, it's an unwarranted privilege on its face. It constitutes an improper use of public position. This also can involve political activity. I mean, this statutory language, we cannot use our public positions to secure for ourselves or others unwarranted privileges, also covers instances where a public employee might use public resources for non-public purposes. We can only use public resources for public purposes. To do otherwise constitutes an improper use of our public position. This extends to political activity for those of you who support campaigns or run for office or what have you. You cannot overlap your public position with any campaign or political activities, because to do so would constitute an improper use of your public position. That also includes your title. You cannot use your public title to endorse a candidate for office, because what does that do? It suggests some sort of official endorsement on that candidacy. It's not allowed. You can support campaigns, you can contribute to campaigns, you can work for campaigns, you just can't invoke your public position in connection with all of that. Elected officials have a little bit of wiggle room. They can be involved in campaign activity because they're elected to a position. They don't have office hours. They're not required to be in a building at a particular time. They have that position 24/7, whether they do anything or not. And it's political in how they get the job and if they want to keep the job. So there's a recognition that they need to have a little bit of flexibility under the conflict of interest law, and they get to use their positions where appointed public employees do not. Disclosing confidential information. If you're dealing with a school building project and you're learning bid information and you get torqued off for some reason and you tell one of the bidders what somebody else bid, that's a problem under the conflict law. To the extent you receive or review confidential information, you may not disseminate that information to anybody who's not authorized to receive it. We had a case involving a district court clerk, and it was query information. We know what query information is. So this clerk had a relative who was running for an election locally. Now, this clerk doesn't have access to query information, but she went up to her best friend in the court one day, Mr. Probation Officer, and those folks have access to query information. She asked the probation officer to run a query check on her relative's opponent in the upcoming election. Didn't tell the probation officer the reason for the request, so the probation officer thought it was a legitimate request. Ran the query check, came up with an arrest record, provided it to the court clerk, who provided it to her relative, who then released it to the media. Guess who won the election? But then the commission learned about the conduct, and the commission took action against that clerk. And in its investigation and decision, the commission said, Madam Clerk, respectfully, even though you're not authorized to access query information, once you received it, you were obligated to keep that information confidential. Instead, you disseminated it to somebody who was not authorized to receive it, and you did so to further a personal purpose. And that's sort of that last phrase is what gets the Ethics Commission's attention. So there are after-hours restrictions as well that for board members, it's not really relevant to what we want to talk about, so I'll just close quickly. In your off-the-job capacity, I talked about how the conflict law applies to you on the job. The gift restriction rules, nepotism rules, code of conduct rules. Even when you're off the job, if you have private, family, or business interests that also involve your level of government, the town or the district, you got to understand the conflict law is going to restrict your ability to represent those private interests before your level of government, because once you become a public employee, the conflict law imposes a duty of loyalty on you to your level of government, to your agency. And you can't compromise that duty of loyalty by representing some third-party interest in a matter that also affects your agency. Now, fortunately, however, there is a provision that applies to boards and committees because they're generally unpaid, or they generally perform their services to their public agency after hours. So there's a provision in the conflict law governing what we call special municipal employees. And most unpaid committees have been designated as special municipal employees, so hopefully you all are. Special municipal employees can continue to represent business or family interests before their level of government, just not before the board or committee they serve on. Okay, so that is going to be the very short version. Let me just see. Yep. Okay, I'm done.
We're going to move right along to Pat Carrera, somebody that I've known for quite some time. Pat is a representative from the Massachusetts Association of School Committees and is here to talk to you about roles and responsibilities in regard to school committee. And although that's a part of our audience, I think it's important to all town officials to understand this as well. So, Pat, without further ado, thank you.
Okay, I guess you can hear me now. Okay, so as Shirley said, my name is Pat Carrera, and I'm from the Mass Association of School Committees. I've been with them for 22 years. Time flies when you're having a good time. And I'm a former school committee member in Springfield, Massachusetts. I did my service of 12 years and said, I've had enough fun, I have to get off now. And I did. But anyway, so what I'm going to try and explain to you tonight is your role as a school committee member, what you do, what the superintendent does, and sometimes those roles kind of converge and it becomes blurry and we're not sure what we do. So hopefully you won't egg me or tomato me or apple me, you know, when I finish telling you these great things. So if you got the handout that I brought, it's right here. What's important, you know, I always say to school committee members when they say, oh, we just got elected, and I don't know whether I should say congratulations or condolences. You know, those 2 meetings a month that somebody told you about, not true. So you should go back and have a conversation with them about that. The important part of being a school committee member is understanding and observing protocols and know what your role is and what the superintendent's role is. It's a balance, and overstepping that balance can sometimes cause great consternation and great upheaval in the district. You have to understand that you're the governing piece of this whole great operation. Your main concern, numero uno, as I say at the Kennel Club, is student achievement. And if that's not why you're on the school committee, then perhaps you should run for something else. I don't know, like cemetery commissioner or something, where you can't cause too much trouble. Anyway, your chief responsibility is the students in your district, which means you also control the budget. But you control the budget only to the point where the superintendent recommends to you, after the superintendent has worked very hard to put a budget together that reflects the district and reflects the goals in the district. There's another red flag word, goals. You set goals in the district. Where do you want to see your district go? How fast do you want to get there? And how are we going to get there? And if what we want to do is going to cost us more money than we think we have, then perhaps we have to scale it back. But it's always should be a conversation between you and the superintendent to decide what are we going to do and how are we going to do it. So maybe putting, I don't know, I would say a new roof somewhere, but that's not a good, I can't say that. That's not a good example. If it's a difference between saying, okay, so the kids are only going to get 1 bottle of water in the morning and it's got to last them all day, and putting a new roof on a school, or giving them 2 bottles of water and not putting a new roof on a school, you know, the choice is kind of obvious, I would think. So you have to think about that. You have to balance what's going on in your district. Okay, so I push this one here in the middle. I don't know anything about this. Are we going up or down?
There's the first one.
Okay, there's the second one.
Is that what you want?
Yep, that's what I want. Thank you. David is wonderful. Although he brings bad news sometimes, but he's still wonderful. Okay, roles and responsibilities of you and the superintendent, and then joint school committee and superintendent roles and responsibilities. And let's just jump down to there. You both have a responsibility for the district's vision and goals. You also have a responsibility to monitor those goals and that vision to make sure you're going in the right direction. I always like to say you need to be on the same train. You just don't have to be in the same car, but you just need to be on the same train. You'll catch up if you're not in the first car. Promise you that. And if somebody slides back, you better work hard to push them back up again, because just remember, it's the kids. I can't say that enough. You'll probably get sick of hearing me say that. So, okay, I'm going to try this now. Oh, sure, David. You know, it's okay. Sure, you're from Boston. What do you know about us out here?
You got to talk nice to me before to work.
Oh, is that it? Well, obviously, because I'm...
The next workshop will be on technology.
And I'll be the first one to sign up. Okay, communicating with the public, that is super important. You really need to do that because you're advocating for the kids. You need to get out there and support the budget that the superintendent has put together for you. You need to let everybody know what's in the budget and why you have that there, and why, you know, you're not going to get a new sign in front of the school this year, or put lights on the sign that you have outside because it's very dark. I'm just saying, if you have anything that you want to do. Because if you blink, you go by it. And so anyway, think about that, okay? Goals and standards, that's up to you. I said that to you earlier. That's very important. You set the goals, you set the standards, but you set it together as a group. As a school committee, you have goals. Your superintendent has goals. And all of those goals need to join somewhere along the line in that train ride that you're on. You have to meet everybody's goals, and they all have to be for the same reason. And what is that reason? Students. There you go. God, you're good. Okay, so that's what you need to do. And that will also help you decide, and the superintendent decide, what the budget's going to look like. Because if you set goals, does the goal need to have a financial tag on it? And if it does, where's it going to come from? And are we going to lose something to make sure that that goal is achieved? The budget is yours. I say this, and all superintendents usually go like this. Sorry, Pat. Sorry, Nancy. You know. Anyway, the budget is yours. You own it. You vote on it. You say, yes, this is what we want to do. But always remember that you're not the educational expert that the superintendent is, and you hired the superintendent and allowed the superintendent to hire people to work on a budget that does, in fact, speak to the educational needs of the kids in your district. Okay, that's very important. It's not just pie in the sky budget. It's what do we need to educate these kids, and my curriculum director tells me that, if you're lucky enough to have a curriculum director. Okay, my curriculum director tells me we need this. My English director tells me we need this. Yeah, I'm going back to curriculum. I don't know. Huh? There you go, special ed people. Thank you, Pat. I know, this is good. Special education, you know, what's happening there? What do we need to make sure that these kids get what they need? So vital, so important. And I'm not the expert in education, and when I was on the school committee, I always used to say to the superintendent, do we need this? And how is this going to impact the kids in our district? Are they going to get better? And that was before, you know, that was horse and buggy days. That was before MCAS and all this business that's going on now. But it was so important that I knew that whatever programs we put in place in the budget helped those kids achieve. And that wasn't easy in Springfield with 45 schools and 25,000 kids. So, you know, consider yourself lucky. up here where nobody knows you are. Only you. David knows now, and David will talk to somebody in Boston, I'm sure.
They briefed me before I got here.
Oh, okay. Yes. He's a good guy. Okay, policy. I guess I can't stress policy enough. Policy is number 2, because I said the budget was number 1. Policy is number 2. Policy, policy, policy. If you don't have an up-to-date policy manual, shame on you. All of you, go home and don't sleep tonight thinking about how you're going to correct that. You need to have an up-to-date policy manual to allow your superintendent to run your district. Now, I know that that sounds absurd, but it isn't. Because whatever you decide, whatever you have in policy, then the superintendent, you're the what piece of policy. This is what we want to see happen. And the superintendent is the how. How am I, as a superintendent, going to be able to make sure that this happens, that this comes to fruition? And that could involve money. God bless the greenback. Okay, it always involves money. It could involve involving the community. It could involve talking to the local colleges to get programs in so that children will succeed. It could involve anything, but you say, this is what we want. We want to see this happen. We want to see Berkshire Community College. Oh, that's kind of far away. Greenfield Community College. Excuse me, sorry. Greenfield Community College come in here with a couple of classes for our kids, AP classes. Is it going to cost? So the superintendent goes out and says, okay, this is how we're going to do this. It's vital. And if that's not written, it doesn't happen. And if it doesn't happen, then you're upset because what you want to put forward doesn't happen. It's just vital. I can't tell you that enough. The other piece of that, the other side, the dark side, and I don't look at the superintendents when I say that, but the dark side is the Department of Education, which we all love. I know, close to your heart. Will come into your district and say, we'd like to see your policy manual. And you go, oh, what policy manual? Well, we want to take a look at it because you need to have policies that address discrimination, wellness, animals in the school, or anything. Okay? That's what we want to see. And you look at them like they have come in with 2 horse heads. We don't have a policy manual. Okay, so if you don't have a policy manual, then, we're going to have this long discussion, and you might find yourself in deeper trouble than you already are because you don't have a policy manual. And doing policy work is, I'm going to say it, it's the most boring thing you can do as a school committee member, okay? But it's probably the second most important thing that you do because without the policy, your superintendent can't run the district the way you want to see it run and the way the people who elected you, because you said this is what you're going to do, want to see it run. Make sense? Think about it, okay? So, you set policy, and it's not limited to the bylaws or rules of order for you as a school committee member. Your manual, collective bargaining agreements, there's policy and collective bargaining agreements, there's in meeting minutes, strategic plans, super, super important elements of student handbooks, because if you have a policy that says, thou shalt not drink alcoholic beverages on school grounds, that has to go into the student handbook. So that's important. It's your policy, but it's in the student handbook. And the superintendent says, and you say to the superintendent, okay, what are we going to do about it if you catch somebody drinking alcohol on the school property? Okay, this is what we're going to do, and this is how we're going to do it. But if you don't have that anywhere, it doesn't happen. The first thing the reporters, God bless them all, will ask you is, what's your policy on that? And you better be ready with the answer. Okay? Budget, municipal charters, regional agreements. I'm going to push this button again. Oh, look at that. Okay? Policy, policy, policy. I can't say it enough. Personnel, you have a variety of responsibilities related to personnel in several areas. You hire the superintendent, you fire the superintendent. That's clear, okay? That's black and white. As far as the other positions go, you hire or you approve to hire the deputy, associate, or assistant superintendents, the special education director, the school business manager, your legal counsel. You hire and fire your legal counsel also. That probably should be up with hiring and firing the superintendent. Physicians, nurses, and attendance officers. We don't always have attendance officers anymore because there's no money in the budget to have them. So, but that's who you hire. But you don't fire them. Okay? The superintendent does that. One of the joys of being the superintendent. She gets, or he gets, to hire and to fire. Okay? But you don't do that. You vote to hire based on the recommendation of the superintendent. Got it? Okay. What is that last? Employee approval? Oh, I got that. We did that. Pushing the button again, David. Okay. The superintendent's responsibilities, and I'm going through this very quickly, is to oversee the day-to-day management of your school district. And that's huge. I don't care how big or how small your district is, it's huge. And it's huge because students are involved. And whenever students are involved, it's huge. Okay, you hire, and she or he hires the administrative staff and approves faculty hiring. You know, now that we have our little, I hate to say empowerment zones, what do we used to call them? Well, yeah, but it's better than that. Each principal owns their own building, okay, since ed reform. So the principal hires in their building, but the superintendent has to say, yeah, okay, I think that's a good hire, which means the superintendent has to look at the applications and the resumes and see what's going on with it, okay? But the principal owns his building or her building, and that's important, and it didn't used to be that way. And that's changed, and sometimes change is very, very hard for some people. Site-based, that's what it was. I should have got to the next line. Site-based management, I'm sorry. My eyes are so bad tonight, I can't even tell you. Okay. Okay. Superintendent will recommend policies to the school committee. Sometimes the state, in their wisdom, always sends out little notices that say, you shall have a policy that does this. And they're very cooperative and warm and fuzzy when they do things like that. We love them. We love to get those things from them. And you shall have, you know, how are you going to do this? As I said, they're very warm and fuzzy, okay? So the superintendent will implement, she recommends policy, budget, and goals to the school committee. And there's that goals word again, okay? And this gets a little hairy. The superintendent has goals, the school committee has goals as a committee, and then the school committee has individual goals as individual school committee members. Is that fun? Okay, but you all have to remember, you have to be going in the same direction, thinking about the same thing, and the prize, you keep your eye on the prize, is God, fast learners, love it. Okay, I guess that's about all I have to say about that. And you can ask me all kinds of questions later. I can't guarantee that I'll answer them, but you can certainly try. Do I have more time, or should I mean, the other, well, no, I want to turn it over to Pat, but there's another handout here, protocols and best practices for effective school committee meetings. This is really super, super important. If you have nothing better to do when you get home tonight and you want a little, you know, bedside reading, do it. And if you're done reading it and you didn't find it interesting, put it in the fireplace. But my advice is to read it. It really kind of gives you an overview of what you, as a school committee member, needs to do to prepare yourself for your school committee meeting, what you do to get there, and how you act when you're there. Biggest thing is don't do this. Okay, when your colleague says blah 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 blah, and you go because the camera, they got it all, and they know exactly where you're thinking. Okay, so don't do that. Thank you very much.
Good evening again. So my background is I was a superintendent of schools for 14 years in Auburn, then another 8 years up in Petersham, and did some interim. So have been there and done that, and I have been working with Pat at different districts. So this was an enjoyable ride, and I appreciate the invitation. So some of what Pat has said, it will be covered, but from the perspective of the superintendent's roles and responsibilities. You can see she or he is a chief executive officer, and along with the general management responsibilities, budget development, it's collaborative, yes, allocation of resources, hiring of personnel, and overseeing, oh, it worked. So the superintendent's first responsibility, in the next 2 slides are 5 key responsibilities. I put them on first because they impact students. The superintendent responsible for personnel, staffing, hiring. You can read that, I don't need to go through all of them, but he or she also approves the personnel hiring in all schools. It's not just, even though the principal is responsible for their schools, it's with the oversight of the superintendent. And that oversight is based on the vision and goals of the district that the school committee sets forward. And notice where it says, follow the district hiring policies and budget restrictions. I can't emphasize enough what Pat said about policies. If you do not have up-to-date policies, if you do not even attempt to review those and upgrade them, you're impeding your superintendent from doing an effective job. And eventually, it's going to come back to, why haven't these policies been reviewed? And when Pat said the DESE comes in, they'll look at, is this a deliberate delay that you haven't looked at these policies? It took us 3 years in Auburn to go through the policies, and it is tedious and boring. But when you look at it from the perspective of a superintendent, it's key that we know exactly what the procedure is for alcohol on the campus or for evaluation of staff. And your policies also connect with your collective bargaining agreements. So don't take that lightly. Really, it is a key factor in how effective your leadership team and your superintendent can be. Superintendent evaluates staff and their performance. We must provide the professional development for all of the personnel so we can evaluate them. So if you as a school committee have said all students will have an opportunity to have a top-notch education, that means all students. And to a superintendent and the principals, that means those diverse learners that have trouble, you have to find a way to support that in your budget. If you're saying all students, that those at-risk students need to have an alternative, and that's also part of your policy manual. What do you do with alternative programs? That the superintendent, if he or she is going to evaluate staff, it's within the policies and it's the directive for what is the vision and the value structure that the school committee and superintendent collaboratively have put together. We follow the contract evaluation procedures, so if you are in the middle of a collective bargaining It's critical that that move as expeditiously as it can and respectfully, because usually contracts have an evaluation component in it, and the longer it takes, the more difficult it is to effectively evaluate your staff. And then meet the educational goals of the district. That's also within your policy manual. Again, I said the first 5 bullets, professional development. So you've put a budget together. You have said our goals and standards are X. The superintendent has to follow those goals and expectations and does that through the professional development for all staff. So it's very important that there's a collaborative structure, that the leadership team and the school committee have the same values and standards that they can implement in their buildings and district-wide. We have to ensure that all personnel have access to it. Then this is the ed reform law, that at some point, if we have to provide the professional development time so they can take it at a least or no cost effort. And that's why we have many of the professional days that are required. And the PD, I'm back saying it's based on the vision, beliefs, and values that you as a school committee have put forward, that you communicate to the public. The curriculum, the superintendent needs to have a cyclical review of the curriculum to meet the goals of the district, develop a review process to be inclusive of parents, community, students at the high school level, and administrators, and recommend to the school committee major adoptions of new courses and new textbooks. Teachers have a responsibility and the authority to say, I am going to teach Thoreau, but I'm going to teach it this way. The school committee perhaps have said, part of the English department is to teach Thoreau. The superintendent and the high school principal can say, we're going to do that in our 8th grade class, our freshman class, our sophomore class. But it's up to the superintendent and the teachers to decide when and how. The school committee decides the overall curriculum, but how it's delivered really is within the domain of the superintendent and the principal and the teachers, collaboratively. School councils, the role of the school councils in the district, the superintendent needs to be actively aware, doesn't have to participate in every one of them, but really needs to meet with the personnel, the principals of all the schools about their school councils, and ensure that the direction the school councils are going meet the direction that the school committee has said we want to go with our district. That's why I'm going to go back to the collaboration between the superintendent, the school committee, and the superintendent's leadership team in collaborating on what we're going to do to move our district forward. The role of the superintendents in governance, because now this is the governance part of it. She is the chief executive officer, advisor to the school committee on educational issues. If the school committee is saying, we're not going to address whatever, I'm careful because you have a lot of flexibility in this. But if the school committee were to say, we don't want to address the diversity in the school, it's the superintendent that would advise, be careful, don't go that area. The law requires you to provide for diverse students. So when I say as an advisor, that's the resource the superintendent is. Leader to the school system's administrative leadership team. So the communication between the school committee and the superintendent is driven into the leadership team through the superintendent. It's really not the domain of the school committee dealing with the leadership team. It's all within the superintendent. And how the superintendent chooses to bring the leadership team forward to the school committee is really her performance. strategic and long-range planning to involve all stakeholders, and ensure all local, state, and federal regulations are protected. Superintendent and school committee are advocates for the district. Superintendent will bring forward information promoting the benefits of the school system, collaborate with other superintendents and state association to inform our state legislators. We have probably at Mass Association of School Superintendents, we have advocacy on this at the State House to ensure that we get the money we need in the public schools, that we advocate for additional money for the social emotional learning. We ask superintendents to come to these meetings, and we hope that school committees would allow that absence from the district to be at these state and local meetings. Participate with state, local, and state officials to advocate for a strong budget. That's critical in January, February. And you'll hear there's a meeting on the Hill. I think school committee meetings, members go to that. We have probably every 6 weeks something that's going before the legislature. Finance and budget. As much as Pat said, and it is the domain of the school committee to create the budget, the superintendent, through her leadership team, develops a vision and values and goals for the budget with the school committee and the administrators. So the administrators and the superintendent are meeting weekly or bi-weekly, however the meetings go, and talk about what's the performance in your school for the students? What's the data on student attendance? What do we need to enhance the program for students? The administrators bring that information to the superintendent, who brings it to the school committee and advocates for changes in the budget, new personnel they may need, and why. That why is very important, that we communicate that. Recommend the annual budget based on the educational goals, oversees the operation, scheduled budget updates to the school committee. Once the budget is put together, it is the responsibility of the superintendent to ensure that it is being, the resources are being used as advised. But sometimes you have an issue, whether it is the carpet in the school was ruined and we need a new carpet, but it's not in the budget. So the superintendent would advise the school committee, we need to transfer money from one account to another to address this need. Technically, there are 5 major accounts in a budget. Within that budget, those major accounts, superintendent can make transfers. If it's a major account transfer from personnel to capital, then the superintendent comes to the school committee to ask for permission to transfer. If it's an emergency, the superintendent must make that change immediately for the safety of the students and then inform the schools. Yes?
Can you repeat that again? When does she need permission from the school committee to transfer from one account?
Oh, it's regional. It's a regional. She doesn't. I come from the municipal. Yeah, regional, she has all the I'm sorry, I misled you on that. I had to. Yes, I'm glad you did. Identify and recommend adjustments to the planned budget. Collective bargaining. The superintendent serves as your resource and assures adherence to all collective bargaining agreement. Once you have a collective bargaining agreement, then it's in the hands of the superintendent to ensure that all the components of that, whether it's the time teachers come in, the amount of time the custodian's schedule is, whatever it is in their collective bargaining agreement, once it's completed, it's in the hands of the superintendent. Policies, resource, again, the policy is critical, that it's up to date. It's a resource to the school committee in developing new policies. The superintendent's a resource. or reviewing existing ones. The impact the policies have on administrative procedures and collective bargaining agreements is profound. That it's the core that the superintendent and administrative team uses to drive the school forward. You can have great goals, but you need those policies updated. So not the last slide, but the one I left is a responsibility of everyone. The communication, open, honest, timely communication to the school committee, to the community. But the community and the school committee have a responsibility to give the superintendent that same open, honest, and timely communication. The superintendent keeps the school committee informed on all school operations and programs, usually at a school committee meeting. If superintendents have to call all school committee members every time something happens, we'd never get into the schools. So it's usually part of your weekly or bi-weekly or monthly agenda that what's going on. Identify and share needs of the school system. Provide timely information prior to school committee meetings so the superintendent could give a weekend update to say, at the next meeting, we're going to cover these issues. But it's all a matter of back to the open, honest, and timely. The news media connection, I don't know if the school committee has a person who is identified as their communications person, but that information needs to be collaboratively done with the superintendent. No one should ever see something in the press, either side, that the school committee wasn't made aware of, or the superintendent wasn't made aware of. Legal rights and responsibilities, it's the role of the superintendent to make sure that the school committee realizes we are doing this because we are required by law to do these things. Now the next step. As much as those are all the management and responsibilities of a superintendent, the superintendent is your educational or instructional leader and a change agent. You hire a superintendent to drive your district forward. The superintendent's responsible for not only managing, but as you go down there, for creating a values-driven culture, defining clear instructional focus, and ensuring accountability for results. It has to be clear. If there's a conflict between what are we doing and what's the school committee's concern and I need to make changes, then it's not clear, and people start to wait to say, are we going forward or what's our next step? So as an instructional leader, if you're going to have successful change, the superintendent is the person who creates the conditions for the change. It's not, as I say there, managerial imperatives or inspirational speeches. You have to have a collaborative approach, clear vision and values for your district. So now the superintendent has to assess, are we ready for change? You can see through that what the history for change, is there a need for change? What change would you like to see? Is the school committee, what changes are you looking to see happen? What's the role of the school committee in this change process? I'm just moving forward. What's the time? We okay?
Well, finishing up, yeah.
Okay. So we have to plan for change. It is the superintendent with the leadership team that creates the change. It's a combination of people and process. Individual actions. Everyone has to be held responsible. It's not just one person. Everybody's part of the process. If you're going to sustain the change, and I say change meaning improve the school district's performance in instructional programs, improve whatever programs or designs you want. But the focus is always having the children improve or offer the children more programs. That's the change. Sustaining the change, Administrative clarity is essential. So the superintendent needs to know this is the direction the school committee is looking for us to go in. And once that's firmly entrenched in both school committee and superintendent's relationship, then the superintendent can move forward with the leadership team. It requires, if you're going to change, a reorientation of values and priorities. What is your focus? So if you're looking at visions, values, and priorities, the leadership, superintendent and leadership team has to be a trustful, honest, open communication and team building. The single factor, this is Michael Fullen, common to successful change is that relationships must improve. There has to be a trusting relationship between the school committee and the superintendent, between the superintendent, the leadership team, between the principals and the teachers, a trusting relationship with the parents in the community, with the school committee superintendent, all of that. If relationships improve, the schools will get better. If the relationships get worse, your improvement is lost. Building relationships with diverse people and groups, especially with people who think differently, is a must. And I put it in as Michael Fullen because he really does have some excellent writings for leading change in your schools, changing the culture. A strong culture in school leadership, all of you, parents, community, leadership team, school committee, must have shared values. Norms of behavior, hold yourself to professional norms of behavior. Your relationships must be respectful and trusting. Communication, how you're going to manage your conflicts and address those non-discussables that everyone addresses in the parking lot, but not in facing people. So here are some, I went through the norms. Possible norms of behavior between administrative team and the superintendent, between the school committee and the superintendent. We expect disagreements with our colleagues, but we treat our differences as resources. Disagree agreeably, balance the advocacy with inquiry. By that I mean you may be really adamant that you want foreign language in that third grade or the elementary, but you need to inquire with the superintendent and the administrative team, is that what we need now? Or is there something else more compelling? Not just be a blind advocate. I'm all for foreign language at that element. I'm all for music at the elementary. But there's more to it when you have limited resources. So I say balance your advocacy for a single area with inquiry. And inquiry is the curiosity. This is what I would like to have, but tell me what else we're facing. Monitor your personal airtime. That's for school committee members. Sometimes people get the mic and don't give it up. But that's monitor your own personal airtime. Encourage the asking and raising of questions because you find the answers. Don't hold those questions in and go out in the parking lot and say, I wish she had or he had said this. Take responsibility for identifying what the issue is. Don't think the superintendent can be a mind reader, as the superintendent will say to the leadership team, tell me what you believe you really need. Not saying you're going to get it, but at least tell me so we know what the need is out there and we'll try to do the best. Oh, and when there is conflict of values and norms, state what that impasse or conflict explicitly, clearly, and crisp. Because conflict is good. It's a creative element where you can come to a solution. But is your interpersonal communication and management style preventing you from getting to an answer? We, superintendents, principals, teachers, all know that we're in the business to recover. There can be mistakes. And principals can say to the superintendent, I need this, oops, I made a mistake. We're in the business to recover, but the only way you can recover is if you are clear about what it is you're looking for. Can this change be an obstacle to, well, so address your conflict with curiosity. I've drifted off a little, but this really is an issue that many superintendents with their administrative team and many superintendents with their school committees have questions. If you have a question, before you advocate for whoever brought the issue forward, what do you know about the issue? Find out. Ask with curiosity, not with judgment. What's the specific timeline? Who was involved? But that's a question to be asked of the superintendent. As the superintendent will say to the principals, tell me more about the situation, who was impacted, how it happened, before any kind of action is taken. And have the correct policies, again, the importance of policies and protocols been followed. Does this fall under the school committee responsibilities or the superintendent? Big question. Non-discussables. Non-discussables. We know there are subjects out there that people walk out of a meeting and they're in the restroom. What did you think about that answer? She didn't respond to that. Come back and ask with curiosity. I have another question. Or they're in the parking lot and they've already said this is going to change, even though they recommended that we have foreign language at the elementary. I don't want it. No, it's because it's usually laden with some real fiery groups of people advocating for one or the other. But bring it forward in a respectful, open, honest communication. The fewer non-discussables, the healthier the organization. The superintendency must reflect a comprehensive and challenging vision of district leadership, a synthesis of managerial and leadership components, respectful and empathetic interpersonal skills, and strategic action assessment. Thank you.
So before you start to panic about the time, I want you to know that I put myself last because I can do mine like in about 2 or 3 minutes. So I want to make sure that you're getting the most important information first. So I want to turn without further ado to Mary Jane Handy, who's here from the Department of Revenue. And I know all ears are going to perk up now because now we're talking about that green stuff. So perk your ears up, take that deep breath. I know it's late in the evening, but without further ado, Mary Jane.
Thank you. I want to thank everybody for inviting me. Ms. Miller, thank you very much. My name is Mary Jane Handy. I'm with the Division of Local Services. And before I start, most people do not know where the Division of Local Services is. Hopefully I will go through and explain shortly. So I've been with the state and work in Boston for the last 2 years. Prior to that, I was a regional school business manager for 15 years, 7 of it at Athol Royalston School District. So just wanted to go through that. I have been in the regional school, and I have worked with the town people in the back of the room who have been listening about schools and superintendents. I'm going to talk to you. My overview is I'm going to discuss who we are. I'm going to introduce the Division of Local Services. I'm going to talk about the regional school budget and process and their audit requirements. So we are one of the 3 branches of the Department of Revenue. There are 3 branches. We're a stool. Think of us as a three-legged stool. We have child support, Division of Local Services, and the tax administration. So when I have a badge that says Department of Revenue, everybody goes through and gives me the sign like I'm a vampire or something. All right, I call us the Robin Hood. We steal the money and we give it Division of Local Services. We're the ones who give it to the towns and to the regional school districts. Yeah, I know you want more, but you know, We haven't found that money tree out on the State House yet. We help cities, towns, and districts achieve sound and efficient fiscal management through technical assistance, training, and oversight. We service 351 cities and towns. Please don't add any more. We're having a hard enough time dealing with 351. 86 regional school districts, 75 charter schools, 61 utility districts, and 2 development agencies. Our office is about 60 people. On the regional schools, Division of Local Services, on the school side, regional school side, we're the ones who certify your excess and deficiency. If you don't know what E&D is like free cash for a city or town. On your town side, besides certifying your free cash, we're the ones who certify your tax rates. So through this whole budget process, I want you to remember something. Regional school districts are not by themselves. Yes, they're a separate entity. But if their budget is not approved at town meeting, my office cannot set the tax rates for those communities. So everybody in this room needs to work together. That's a very novel idea. All right? Well, we talked about communication. I will go through, I worked 15 years for a regional school district. And those 15 years, not once did we not have a budget passed the first time at town meeting. All right, I worked at a vocational school, 8 towns. We always had one town, yes we did, we had one town that didn't pass. But when you have 8, you have that luxury. When you're a 2-town district, you don't have that opportunity. And you're not going to find out, you don't want to go to town meeting and find out at town meeting it doesn't pass. You want to get the support before you walk into that meeting. The annual budget for the regional school district is the primary policy statement and establishes the priorities of the district. The school district can ask everything, they can ask for the pie in the sky. If the town can't afford it, they have to realize this. And the only way you're going to know about it is you sit around the table and discuss. That's very important. While school committees often consider education policy entities, the general laws give the school committee significant fiscal powers for their budget. But please remember that last one. The law does not authorize the school committee to incur expenses over the budget. You can't spend more than you have. The school committee is ultimately responsible for controlling the expenditures and operating within the budget. How many regional school districts have to go back to town meeting to go through and get an amended budget? Nobody does it because they're not going to go back to the town a second pass. It's hard enough the first time. Don't go through on the second time. They'll make cuts, they'll go through, they'll squeeze. As my Canadian friends say, you go through and you make the queen dance. As public officials, we're entrusted with public funds. We have to ensure that the public funds are expended and monitored in a responsible fashion. Nobody can do this except you as school committee and as administrators. The adopted budget needs to be closely monitored. I'm going to go through the budget process just in case people don't know what the budget process is for a regional school. They're going to have to prepare a balanced budget. Just like on the town side, you have to have a balanced budget on the town side. You cannot have your tax rate certified if your budget's not balanced. The school committee cannot go through, present a budget, meaning revenue and expenses equal to the towns. I'm going to brief this a little bit for time here. There's a public hearing on the budget. Then the budget has to get adopted by the school committee. It takes a 2/3 vote by the school committee. And then it has to go to approval of the local operating authorities, meaning the member towns. So if I remember correctly, it's 4 towns here in Pioneer. You need 2/3. You can only have one person, one town that says no, or else you don't have a budget. That town says no, you don't have a budget, that town cannot have their tax rate set till that budget's done. One novel idea that's been happening at Division of Local Services when I started is because I was a school business manager, Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed in my office speak all the time. So that's new for us too. Because if a town or a community, if a regional school doesn't have a budget, we go through with Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed and try to figure this out and say, what do we need to do? How can we help the community? We're the gentler Division of Local Services. The changing nature of local government services, and I'm going to read this because it's very important, and the increasing complexity of service delivery require various town officials, boards, committees work together. This includes sharing of information and resources, finding joint solutions. When one group reads it in the paper and the other group sees it and they don't know anything about it, even a school committee versus a superintendent or a town, if you don't go through and you read it in the paper, that discord, that is very, very hard to repair. If something is going on in the regional school district, this should always go through and before they read it in the paper and it affects the community, make sure they know about it. Just out of courtesy, they are your neighbors. The need for cooperation and coordination is critical. And again, if you don't play nice in the sandbox, we can't go through and balance your budget and help you balance your budget. The state, unfortunately, has limited resources. There is more pressure on the communities to go through and finance education. We know that. And there's a conflict, and it's everywhere in the Commonwealth, and it's everywhere in the whole country. There's a conflict between schools and towns about services because the towns, to go through and afford the school budget, are cutting back on services. My office of Division of Local Services can go through and help. We can go through and do financial reviews. We have community compact grants right now that go through and will go through and help you with exploring shared services among communities. We've done 3 right now. We've done a town manager being shared in Lee and Lennox. We helped funded that study. We also helped fund the transition costs. We have 6 towns looking about sharing financial services from the 6 towns. So instead of 6 towns having a treasurer, collector, an assessor, and everything, and an accountant, town accountant, they're looking about having 1 and sharing it, or 2 and sharing it among the 6. We're trying to go through and help the communities. And through the Community Compact initiative, I'm hoping that the towns here in this area will go through and ask for some help. The other thing that the school district has to have, and this is a requirement, and a lot of the towns don't need it, the school district has to have an audit. It is a requirement. And this was put in I'm dating myself now, because I was part of that original. Around just before 2000. It was because there was a fraud in a regional school district. And the state said this will not happen again. And they put an audit requirement that regional schools have to have an audit. Unfortunately, we don't have that same requirement for every city and town in Massachusetts. There are other regulatory agencies that have forced the audits on towns. If it's federal receipts, federal grant receipts, and or bonds that you do compliance with your bondholders. But the regional schools have to have audits. Every school district, within 9 months of the close of the fiscal year, have to undergo an independent audit. The reports shall, again, big word, shall, doesn't mean may, it says shall, be received in public session. That's a responsibility of the school committee. The audit reports must be submitted to DESE and to the Division of Local Services. And if we don't like what we see, we'll contact you. So I left some time for you, Shirley.
Great. Thanks, Pat. Okay, I don't want to cut us off too much in terms of our time for Q&A, but Karen is nicely putting up my little PowerPoint there. And when I said I could do it in a few minutes, that's an understatement. So Karen, we don't have to worry about YouTube tonight, I don't think. Okay? And I guess everybody's using the button, so I guess I have to jump on that bandwagon, huh? Yeah, it works. Okay. So there is a website, and I would refer you to that. And I think you only got from me one page back to back. That's all you got from me. And what it had on one side was URLs, and I think, what did it have on the other side? Open meeting law. Okay, there is an open meeting law regional workshop that is happening. That's one of the reasons that the Attorney General's office didn't send anybody here this evening. And that's going to be held on the 15th at the John Ulver Transit Center. And you've got all the information, the date and time, and how to call to register for that. And I would strongly encourage some of you, or at least representatives from each of the towns, to go to that as well. But I wanted you to know that there is a Division of Open Government. On that website, and you have, again, the URLs, you can go in, you can get the open meeting law itself. Even better, there's something called the Open Meeting Law Guide, and I'd rather refer you to the guide than the law itself. The guide is a little easier to get your way through. It's also a place where you can find the complaint forms if you feel that that's something you need to do. It also has the receipt for the open meeting law materials. When you are an elected official, all of you should be familiar with the fact that when you took your oath of office, you were handed a plethora of paperwork, and then you signed off that you received that. That was a lot of that was the open meeting law information. And then it puts the burden on you, okay, as an official, to be aware of what the open meeting law is. And then there are checklists, and I just wanted to show you very briefly what one of the checklists look like. And I got to tell you, some of these are things that even I wasn't aware of when I was on a school committee myself. And so I'm looking at these things and saying, this is really great stuff, especially as a chairperson of a school committee. Checklists for entering the executive session, and I only took the first couple of items, okay, just to show you what the checklists look like. But, I'd have these checklists right in my binder, and if I was getting ready to go into executive session or whatever, I would use these checklists to make sure that I was in compliance with open meeting law. We were going to see a video, but we're going to skip that because, on a cold winter's evening when you still have power, but there's nothing on TV to watch, then I would refer you to one of those URLs, put your feet up, have a nice hot cocoa, and watch some of the videos on open meeting law, because actually they do a very nice job. And we'll skip, because of time tonight, seeing one of those. But I wanted to hit some key points tonight regarding open meeting law, so I do it some due diligence. Have you signed your receipt of open meeting law forms? Now, I have a feeling that the town clerk, where you took your oath of office, probably didn't let you leave the office until you had signed that. So I would tend to think that most of you are in compliance there. Are you clear on the proper use of email communications? Now, because we aren't seeing that little video clip, you're not seeing the piece about email communications. But you need to be aware of that. I think sometimes we forget about, with this ease of email, that you can be breaking the open meeting law very clearly by sending email communications. If someone is on a board with me and they send me an email, and then I send that email with a comment, perhaps, about that email to another person, who then comments about it and sends it to the next person, the minute we hit with that kind of email passing and a comment about whatever the material is, okay, if I reach a quorum number, I have broken the open meeting law, okay? You have to be very, very, very careful with email, okay? That's why they assign you usually a district email when you become an official of a particular town or community. So if you are an official and I'm talking about something and you're saying, whoa, maybe I better check that out, go in and check out that open meeting law guide, check out the part on the email, or contact me, okay, through the district here, and they'll get you in touch with me, and I will be glad to tell you the part and highlight it and send it to you, okay, to one person, okay. Are you clear about the use of executive session, including when and how to utilize executive session? Because I can tell you the guidelines about, when do we talk about an employee? And do we do that in open session? And under what circumstances do we do that? Now, some of those things, some of those discussions have to be in open session, but some of them are required to be in an executive session. And it's extremely important, and it's only a paragraph or two in the law. You have to be familiar with those things, or you make yourself culpable. And you can be sued as a public employee because you're supposed to be knowledgeable. You signed a receipt that you got all the information. So now you are supposedly informed. So I really encourage you, even though I'm giving it just a couple of minutes this evening, this is a very, very important thing, the open meeting law. And so you need to take it very, very seriously in terms of your obligation. So please take advantage, like I said, on a winter's night to watch a little bit of the video. You can choose, hunt and peck and go around where you need, or take a look at the guide, or again, come and ask me some questions, or better yet, contact the AG's office. I found them to be very, very helpful when I was trying to find a couple of pieces to share this evening. Okay? So what I'm going to do, that's my piece, okay? That's about as brief. Anybody who knows me, that's the briefest thing I've ever done in my career. So what I want to do is open it up to question and answers, but at the same time I want to honor, and I know some of you will have questions and some of you will start to drift out the door. By the way, when you're drifting out, if there's cookies left, be sure you take cookies. We don't want to have any left over, okay? All right, so I want to start by thanking our panel, David, who traveled quite a distance to be here, and Pat Carrera from MASC, and Pat Martin sharing with us about her experiences as a superintendent, and also Mary Jane, who had some very, very intriguing things to say about revenue. So it's been a wonderful evening, and I want to thank them for their time and their dedication to informing us all about the importance of their various subjects. So please share with me. In addition, I want to say thank you to Karen, who put all it together in terms of getting the technology to work. I'm always thankful for that.
And I'm sorry, Patricia, I think it is. My question, is that? Okay. Superintendent, but maybe you can all answer this for me. Can someone provide tools when we come to an impasse on making decisions? If we don't have the information prior to the meeting and the discussion gets a little heated, and then all of a sudden someone calls for a vote and someone else says, wait a minute, I need more information. Give us the tools as to how we should proceed, because I think that's where you get the parking lot topics. People leave the meeting and they say, I wasn't informed ahead of time. And I'm not sure about this. I'm sorry if I misspeak, but I think it has led to revotes in our school district and maybe in our towns. So really looking for tools of collaboration.
Okay, that's a great question, and I'm going to kind of answer, my colleagues here are kind of nodding at me on this one. And what I want to say about that is I heard a lot of things tonight, and I made my own notes, and I circled things. One that I circled was trust, and one that I circled was change. And what's happening right now in a lot of districts is that we are being forced to change because of legislative mandates and because of reduced financial circumstances. So there's no choice about that. And sometimes people don't like change, isn't that true? And so when change starts to happen, people get nervous. And when they get nervous, sometimes that trust goes down. And so to say, is there any trick or is there any real strategy to it? The strategy is exactly what I heard my colleagues saying tonight, and that is, it is imperative that we can have a professional relationship and clear communication with each other that honors each of us in being able to speak what we need to say, to have it heard, and to be able to have the time to make the important decisions that are in the interest of our town members, because they're the ones that elected you, or the students who are the ones we serve if we're on school committee. So that's the only trick, is we have to be respectful. We have to have trust with each other. And I've served on school committees. I know my colleagues have as well. And I'm telling you, it's sometimes very difficult. Sometimes we just want to go screaming, okay? That's not how we get things done. It's not in the fairness to the people we serve. We have to. And the burden of that is usually on the chairman of your town councils or your select boards. It's on the chairman of the school committee. These are the people who have the leadership roles. It's the superintendent. It's the principal of a building. These are the people who have the responsibilities to help bring that community together and to be able to have an environment where it's safe and it's productive to work together and be patient. There should be no vote that's so quickly pushed that a member of that community that was elected is not having an opportunity to share a question or concern, okay? Now, you got to do your homework. I was on a school committee. I used to get packets like this to get ready for a school committee. Due diligence is I have to be prepared. If I come in and I'm not prepared and I'm asking questions that have to do with not being prepared, that's not fair to the members of my board, okay? I hope that answers your question in some fashion. Very good.
Hi, my name is Deb Gilbert, and I'm with Bernardston, and I am a school committee member. First, I'd like to thank you all for coming out and sharing everything that you did. I applaud professional development for anyone. And with that, I guess my question would be directed to Patricia Carrera. And my question would be, at any time, has the Mass Association of School Committees ever thought to make professional development mandatory? And I'm talking beyond the basic new person starting. I would like to see something come in and be mandatory. I know in my profession we have 12 credits every 2 years that we have to do. That's mandatory for my job. So I consider the school committee's job dealing with education very, very, very important. And we are dealing with other people's children. We are dealing with kids that are currently in the school, coming up into the school, and those that aren't even born yet, and to have a futuristic view of what these kids need. So I'm looking to see if you folks would make some type of professional development mandatory.
That's an excellent, excellent question. Do you want me to stand? Oh, I'm getting old. Just standing up, sitting down doesn't work very well. Let me answer your question, or start to answer your question by saying MASC worked very, very hard, maybe 10 years ago, I don't know exactly, to get a mandatory training passed in the legislature. And the legislature was loath to do it. Okay, we had to fight with them to have this happen. Now it's mandatory that you have to go within a year for this training so that you get an overview of what your position is and what you do as a school committee member. Now, having said that, if you don't go, we don't send, the mandatory police after you because there isn't such an animal. So to answer your question, I would love to see that happen. I think it would be a great impetus for school committee members to know that they could get 12 or 15 or 20 credits, whatever, toward whatever, and that's for a brain bigger than mine to figure out. But that requires us to go back to our membership, bring it up at our meeting, our annual meeting, have it part of a resolution, get it passed, have our illustrious attorney, Steve Finnegan, write it into some piece of legislation, bring it to our great and wonderful general court, and we all know how quickly they move on things, and hopefully get it passed. But, I hope that answers your question. I know it doesn't. I know you want me to say, yes, we do that, okay, but we don't. I would love to say that to you. But that's the process that we have to go through to do that. I've always thought that we should. I mean, we worked with the Superintendents Association. Oh, she's such a smart person. Pat says you should put it in your policy. Wow. You know that book that you're supposed to have that you don't have, that you can't find? That one, okay? Put it in the policy. That's excellent.
I say this not from trying to be funny. This is a moral imperative. And by that I mean you are about to take an action that's going to have a profound impact on children for a long time. Therefore, it's a moral imperative. If that's what it is, put it in the policies and say, we need to make sure that all of us are aware of our actions and how it's going to impact our district for a long time. The policies is yours. It doesn't supersede state law or anything. It's something more that you've decided you wanted to impact or put in your policies. And the reason I stood up is that I am with all the superintendents and people sitting here. It's all about the kids. And if it's going to help them, make it a requirement. Didn't mean to take your time.
That's okay. I don't mind sharing it with you. By the way, just as an aside, when I first went to work at MASC and I first started doing policy work, Pat was the first district I worked with, and it was painful. But you know what? We got through it. She's here. I'm here. Life is good. So that just proves that you can get along if you collaborate, okay? And oh, excuse me, commiserate. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I wish I had a better answer for you. I really do.
Where would we get these classes if we were to make policy?
Well, now that's a good question. Where would we get these classes if we were to make policy? Well, you know what? Greenfield Community College is down the road. Maybe you could have a conversation with their president. He's a great guy. I worked with him before on a few issues. Talk to him. Maybe he'd be willing to step in and say, okay, we'll give you this, this, and this, provided the Department of Education is in on it. Not that you want them in on it, but...
One of
Yes.
if I could, Pat.
Yeah, go
One
ahead.
of the things about this regional training for open meeting law
Yeah.
is I called with the Attorney General's office. They have a municipal unit, and they're based in Worcester. And that particular person who runs it, I know her very well, and I called and I said, I am tired of reading in the paper. Again, I live in Central Mass, so I read the paper. I read it every morning. I'm one of those old schools. I read the paper. I'm tired of reading in the paper open meeting law conflicts. So what I did is I went through and I said, I think we need to have an open meeting law seminar in Central Mass along Route 2. So what they went through is they said, okay, where can we have it? And I said, which community college do you want? You can do it Mount Wachusett and you can do Greenfield. Take your pick. So they went through and did Greenfield. But this is how you find, if you have something you want, if it's something that you want from Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed, ask. All they can say is no.
And you know what?
Okay.
And do it at a meeting and have your superintendent do it for you. You know, you can make a motion that this is what you want to do. Please, you know, Mr. Superintendent, would you look into this for us and report back to us at our next meeting? Start the ball rolling.
Yeah, and the other thing is that I want to go back to the question. The first question was asked, and it may be the same thing. Perhaps the school committee or town council or select board might want to have a set of norms as a part of their policy. And so these are the norms under which we will be operating, and these are the norms of respect and trust that we will have with each other. And so I might suggest that as well, because that could solve your problem as well. The other thing is, as long as I'm, still standing and willing to volunteer, this is the kind of thing, like setting up tonight and whatever, it's the kind of thing that, Ruth doesn't have time for, so many of you don't have time for. I do. So if it's something that the school committee wants, for example, a particular training, let me set that up for you. The other thing is, I was a trainer for many, many years of my 42 years of education. That was part of what I did. And so I can do trainings on an awful lot of topics. So these are things that are available now to the group as well. So there's a lady who's all ready to ask a question here.
Our executive director, Glenn Kuchar, is putting together the next step in your training as new school committee members. So, perhaps that's an area that we could look at. We always do workshops. All you have to do is call us, and we're there in a New York minute. I mean, really, I live in Springfield, so I can get up here and on a good night, maybe half an hour. On a bad night, maybe an hour and a half, It's like going to Boston. But we are doing that, and he is looking into trying to upgrade what we already have, and I will pass that along to him. But that's an excellent idea. And don't be afraid to call MASC or MASS, or our illustrious, what's your name? Oh, David, I'm sorry. And ask the questions that you want answered. And we're always willing to do that, okay? And another thing to your question back there, from Leiden, was it? I wrote down, as Shirley was saying, I wrote it down and then she said it and I thought, she must be psychic. I wrote due diligence. Okay, it's trying to work together. Like, do you get the information on the budget that you need in enough time? So maybe that's something that you should be talking to the school committee about, you should be talking to the superintendent about, and the superintendent should be talking, if you're lucky enough to have a business manager, about, so that you get the budget that the school committee and the superintendent have agreed is going to advance in time, so that you can read it, so that when it comes to your meeting, they're not out in the parking lot breaking the open meeting law, because that's what you're all doing, okay, to discuss it. So I just wanted you to know that I was listening. And I used to be blonde, so people said I didn't listen, but.
I'm Jeannie Milton. I'm on the school committee. All of you have said to contact you. I don't recall having contact information for any one of you. So if that somehow it could be provided, that would be helpful. Thank you.
I have some business cards. I come prepared. Excuse me, I'm sorry. Excuse me, Mary Jane comes prepared. Do you have business cards? No.
I come prepared.
I have some here. I'll be happy to share, okay? And you can get me. And you can call MASC anytime. And David is great, and Carolyn is like, I mean, his right-hand person is outstanding. Mm-hmm. I love Carolyn.
This is for David. In my office, superintendent's office, I have one conflict. One person from the committee has submitted something saying that they have a conflict. There are other members on the school committee that may or may not have conflicts, but I don't think that they were aware of that, especially when they started. Would they still need to do it now even though they started years ago, some of them?
There we go. Okay, when you say conflicts, what does that mean?
We have someone that's coaching.
Okay, if they have conflicts of interest. Everyone has to complete the online training program, and that really is a comprehensive look at the conflict of interest law. So, and it is incumbent upon all of us as public employees to know and comply with the conflict of interest law. So if, for example, you have a teacher who's also a coach and they're getting paid separately for that, that's going to be problematic, but they should be on notice after completing the conflict of interest law education requirements.
Some of them have been perhaps on school committee for a number of years, and, you know, this has gone by the wayside. It's just year after year they're on the school committee.
Sure.
So, at this point, it might be for us, as good due diligence for education, to say to them, you're not in compliance. You need an exemption form completed. And telling them that that needs to happen. As an employee, as you said earlier, paid or not paid, you need to have that exemption form, and it needs to be filed in the superintendent's office.
Right, and that's problematic, and it's problematic for a couple of different reasons. The compliance rules are very complicated. The way it works with the Ethics Commission is we'll talk to you about your situation, but we can't talk to you about somebody else's situation. So before you go off and tell somebody you're not in compliance, you need to do this, you need to be sure you know what you're talking about, because when you're talking about, you know, disclosing a conflict of interest, what are you disclosing? What are the compliance rules? If you have an appearance of a conflict of interest and you're an elected school committee member, that where does that disclosure get filed? But if you are reporting that you have more than one job with the school department, which could be allowed, you may file that disclosure with the town clerk's office. So knowing when you have to file a disclosure, knowing where to file the disclosure, and knowing what to disclose is fairly complicated. So the best you can do is to give a person a heads up to call our office and talk to the person we have as the attorney of the day. And so you're correct. You may have long-standing issues, but these people are sort of walking on thin ice. They better hope we don't find out about it, because if what they're doing violates the conflict law and we can get them into compliance, we'll do that confidentially. But if what they're doing violates the conflict law in a substantive way, you know, there's going to be problems. And the heads up that we can provide our colleagues, our staff, those around us, they help situations from blowing up. You know, like who calls the Ethics Commission? You know, the people who feel that they have been aggrieved in some fashion by something with government. Maybe it's somebody who didn't get a job and somebody else did and they thought it was favoritism. Maybe somebody is, you know, got two different jobs and somebody thinks, well, they had an inside track and that's how they got it. Geez, I would have loved to have had that job. So people need to just think about situations, can they blow up, and call our office and get advice. Now, we don't give out advice on past conduct situations, but our legal division is very adept at taking past conduct situations and saying, we can't give you advice about what has happened, but going forward, this is how the law would apply to your situation, hint, hint, nod, nod. And then hopefully the people can get in, you know, into compliance that way. I'm available to handle everything. We have an enforcement division where people can make complaints. We have a legal division where people can seek advice, and then there's me, and I handle all other questions that fall in the cracks. I'm happy to have hypothetical discussions about how the conflict of interest law would apply to any situation. So if you have a committee member who you think needs to file a disclosure and hasn't called me, and we'll have a discussion about the particular issue, you know, and I'll explain to you whether there's an implication or not, and then you can decide your next step. Do you want to give the person a heads up? Do you want to suggest they call us? Do you want to call our enforcement division and report the matter, and what have you? We have over 30 different disclosure forms, depending on what section of the law or regulation is in play. It's very complicated, and that's why, and understand something, that you would not have any authority under law to enforce the conflict of interest law. And when you're talking about building trust and having open communications, nothing causes that process to degrade more than somebody perceiving an accusation against them. What will happen is your relationship with someone can deteriorate. We don't want that to happen. Boards work best when they work harmoniously. And when you have allegations and cross complaints, that doesn't happen. Let the Ethics Commission work behind the scenes to address issues. If it's a compliance issue, we can get someone into compliance. We do that confidentially. We do it hundreds of times a year all across the state.
Okay, Sharon, and there's a mic there.
I'm kind of disappointed that it's been, this has been pointed out as directly as it has, because it's really identified a person. And I think in doing that, it was not fair to that person. So I'm just voicing my opinion on that. I think it should have been done in a different venue. You don't, but everybody else does.
Oh, I'm sorry. The question was phrased in a way that it seemed fairly hypothetical. I have no knowledge of the specifics, and I will say this. I cannot talk about specifics. So had I known the specifics, I would have deferred on the question because the Ethics Commission does not comment on actual situations. We would never say anything that could be viewed as prejudicial if we were to look at something. So again, my role would be to generally explain the conflict law and to ask that any questions asked of me be done so in a hypothetical manner, because I don't want to talk about actual situations, especially if they implicate the conflict law.
Okay, other questions? Yes, ma'am. And again, there's a mic right there.
I think it's on. Okay. I'm Bartha Morris. I'm on the school committee from Warwick. And I've been on the school committee for 8 years, but there's something I'm still quite confused about. Well, there's many things I am, but this is the one I'm bringing up tonight. When it comes to curriculum, and I guess this would be addressed to you, Pat, or both Pats. I dropped the sheet of paper. But when it comes to curriculum, it says on this sheet, roles and responsibilities of the superintendent. Cyclical review of the curriculum to meet the goals of the district, and develop a review process to be inclusive, and then recommend to the school committee major adoptions of new courses and new textbooks. So here we have the juxtaposition of curriculum development and budget, of course. So am I correct in my understanding that when new courses or new curriculum in general is brought to the school committee, we are making a judgment strictly on the basis of can it be paid for, or do we get into the pedagogical, I think I'm mispronouncing that. Do we consider the learning expectations of it along with the budget?
The superintendent deals with the pedagogy. The superintendent deals with the pedagogy with the leadership team, and they bring it forward to the school committee to say, within your goals and the vision you have for the district moving forward, we have determined, the superintendent and leadership team, that this is the best move. This is the cost for it. The school committee can say, I agree, but we can't afford it. It is the superintendent's responsibility to make you aware of what they need. It's your responsibility to say, we can't afford it, or we can afford it. So it's not your place, because the superintendent and the leadership team have that educational expertise. It's not your place to say, okay, I think you should have a different book. I think you should have a different grade level. That's not your place. That really is the domain of the superintendent. But does what's coming forward meet the educational goals of your school committee district, and can you afford it? That's how you look at it.
That's what I thought. That was not completely clear to me. Thank you.
I hope we clarified it.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
All right, hi. Tracy Rogers with the Northfield Select Board. Once a board gets to the point where the trust has been broken and people are having difficult conversations, I'm familiar with professional mediation, but what other resources are there for them to tap into to try to build that trust back up?
Facetious, I'd say have a party and everybody come and, BYOB, and you could start. Y'all hear that? Huh? I never said anything about that. That's not, you post it. When in doubt, post it. That's what we tell all school committee members. You got a problem? Post it, That's a really good question. I think what you have to do is wherever that trust has been broken, I think you have to go to the chief executive officer. If it's with the school committee, it would be the chair of the school committee and probably the superintendent, and sit down and say, okay, this is what's been going on for eons of years. We need to change this. We want to come back into the fold. We don't want to have this, everybody at each other. I think that's where you should start. I think that's a good place to start. Am I right or wrong? Or
Yes.
you want to answer?
Very serious question.
It is.
Because it's the children who will be hurt by this.
Right.
And your teachers, your faculty, whomever will go underground, as I refer to it. Because once an injustice is done to either side, no one trusts. And until you can get that trust back, the teachers are going to say, I'm not even going to take a side because they don't trust people around them. It's all generated from the school committee leadership and the superintendent leadership. So it's a profoundly important question to which I don't have an answer other than we have brought in mediators to talk about it. But for yourself, if you take your own reflective practice and say, where have I, whether it's the superintendent or the school committee, where have I not given respect, and at least try to understand the other perspective. I'm not saying it works, but and back to the very first question, I used to have a cue with a member of the committee to say when I thought things were going awry and were getting personal, it would, Madam Chairman or Mr. Chairman, could I have a moment? Could we have a brief recess? That's a cue. This is not going to go in the right direction. And the school committee would allow that 5-minute break to say, let's all gather back and make sure that what we say is not going to cause us to have low trust, and therefore our improvement is going to be lost. I just can't emphasize enough that those adult actions are having a profound impact on the children.
Yeah, the last piece that I would add to that also is that this is a trickle-down effect. So in other words, if you end up with, let's say, at a select board or town meeting environment, that there's some hostilities and let's say, poor behavior that takes place, that can trickle down to other committees within your town. It can trickle down into the schools and the school committee. The school committee's behavior can trickle down into the schools, into the district office, into the principalship, into the principal and the relationship with teachers, and the teacher's relationship with students. And when you have gotten that far, you're at stage 4, okay? Which means you've got to do some tremendous intervention. And everything that my colleague said here is absolutely correct. Mediation, I am a firm believer in that. Unfortunately, sometimes, but I'd be glad to explore this, sometimes mediation costs money. And right now, money becomes an issue. So then you're stuck trying to find people to volunteer. And again, we try to do the best we can to do that. But everything that was suggested here is absolutely correct. Some inner soul searching, some putting things aside, some realizing we need to move ahead. All these kinds of things are critical because it eats away at the community in the broadest sense. So that was an excellent question. Others?
Yes, please.
In my profession, in my personal profession, we police our own. So my question is, who polices the school committee?
The voters,
Other than that? I mean,
Well,
because
you know,
you're-
if you don't like something that's happening on the school committee, then the next time elections come along, you don't vote for that person. You know,
well, that could be out a number of
well,
years.
that's very
so-
true, okay? But perhaps it's you as a community member going to the chair of the school committee or going to the person who's causing the issue and having that conversation. Goes back to what Pat mentioned and what Mary Jane mentioned is communication. You know, if you don't have that, you don't have anything. You really need to communicate those thoughts and those feelings. You need to get them out, because not only are they damaging to the person that's involved, but they're damaging to you. And that's not a good thing. That's my 2 cents. I don't know.
Other questions? Yes.
Hello. Yes, we're up. I'm David Young, and I'm one of the 5 members of this committee that has conflict of interest that I'm aware of, or had. In my case, I'm a appointed town coordinator of a member town, and I'm an elected school committee member. So I've filed my section 268A 20C disclosure. My question, though, has to do with budget, and I think it goes to Pat Martin. My ears perked up. You said we're trying to get ourselves from 400 line items to some more groupings that make sense. And you know, my eyes lit up when you said, I believe that there were 5 general budget areas or major accounts, and I got personnel and capital scribbled down, and I'm dying to know what you think the other 3 are.
So when I said that, remember it's for a municipal budget, but it would follow in with regional too. We have a line section that's called the 1,000 account, which is all school committee issues, whether it was for their professional development, and it's not a big area. But the 2,000 account is instructional. So within that area, you have the personnel and books and curriculum, all of that. 3,000 was equipment, support programs.
4,000 is facilities.
Right.
Yeah. 4,000 is facilities. That's your facilities. 5,000's contractual services. Thanks, guys. 6 is supplies. 7 is debt service for regional schools.
Regional schools.
You end up having your debt service. SPED, 9,000's. It's out of district SPED.
Yeah.
You might have out of district SPED. I don't know.
Regular sped is in the 2,000.
Yeah, you have out of district tuitions.
I think that's bonds.
Yeah, 8 is debt, excuse me.
Debt.
And then 7, that's what happens when you haven't done it for 2 years, you know? Yeah.
There
It's
is
the end of to look at this, there is from Department of Elementary and Secondary Education, they have a chart of accounts, and it's also in their end of the year report.
Chart of accounts.
It's the chart of accounts at the end of the year reports.
They have upgraded their website, so it does make it easier.
It's under the accounting and auditing section.
These are the sorts of things that you can ask.
And the summary is also posted by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed on their website.
Can- Jesse, it's terrible.
It's terrible, and that's why I'm saying you can ask of your superintendent or
Yeah.
ask of someone
Right.
to.
Have you gone on the new mass.gov website? We just, at the end of September, the Commonwealth changed the website. I cannot find anything in ours anymore, so.
Can I just inquire? So when you initially had brought up the 5 major accounts in the budget, and now we've gone over, there's actually 9, it sounds like. You had made a comment about transferring within those major accounts, and then you backtracked and said, wait, you're a regional district. And so I was just wondering how that affects it. Is there...
So I'm going to let her take it because she's Division of Local Services. But for me, because I was a municipal superintendent for one district, it's a different set of standards. So she can...
You have to remember that when you have a school, as Pat was in Auburn is a department of the town. Okay, the school is a department of the town. Regional schools are different. When your regional schools, and it depends on the regional school, when your school committee votes on your budget, if I could, Madam Chair, do you vote it in total, or do you vote it by sections? In total. Therefore, the superintendent has full reign within, as long as they do not go through and overexpend the bottom line of that budget. If you went through and did it differently, such as at town meeting, you probably do police, and I'm not picking on police, but you usually go through and present police as salary and expenses. That has to be, and that's voted on the omnibus budget at town meeting. That's how it's presented, that's how it gets presented, and that's how it has to be transferred. So it's very different in a regional, because they vote it as a bottom line number.
Is that a policy?
No, that's the law. That's state law.
State law says school committees in a region have to vote a bottom.
No, you can vote it differently. But school committee, because your school committee votes as a bottom line, okay? So that's the difference. And I'm not sure if your prior school did the same. And when you were... It varied. It depends, because Athol Royalston was in total. Most school committees, most schools that I've dealt with in regionals are bottom line. Okay? They still, don't forget, at town meeting, you get your FinCom, all right, and I'm not going to speak for here at this school. And when I was in Athol Royalston, our FinCom, we met, both the superintendent and myself as business manager, we visited the FinCom and the Board of Selectmen, Finance Committee, excuse me, the Finance Committee and the Board of Selectmen at every single town starting in February with the draft budget. We started talking early. We also went through and gave some preliminary assessments, just so that we all had some talking points. I worked at a vocational school. We had 8 towns. We had to meet with 8 towns. So.
But if that is line item, which is, who asked that question? You did. Okay, if it's line item, it still is presented to the town as a bottom line.
It's still presented because the town's only voting on their assessments. You only vote on your assessments. You're not voting individual line items on the budget.
Now, somebody over here, I think you had a question.
Okay, this is to you, Shirley. It's in regards to the open meeting law. When you post an agenda, and we've had all new ways to post, I usually post the bottom line, something about any topic not reasonably anticipated 48 hours in advance. How far off the agenda or topic can you go? Can you just bring up anything? That is becoming a very sticky point.
Yeah, it's a good question, and I will not, and I'll say this very clearly publicly, I am not an expert on the open meeting law, so I will be glad to research that and then make sure that we get a question out to people, or an answer out to people. However, I will say this, the statement that you just said to me is that it could not reasonably be anticipated prior to the 48-hour deadline. So, for example, if something comes up and there's another deadline you have to meet, like a grant, or something that comes up. I mean, I worked in East Hampton. One of the things I was in charge of was grants. I know that frequently we would suddenly be told about a grant and the deadline was coming up immediately, and we had to do something in very short order. That was unanticipated, okay? That was not something that we had been sitting on and we wanted to bring up at a meeting. So again, I will get you a better answer than that, but I will say to you, and there are frequently asked questions on this URL, although I do not, having read those pretty carefully before tonight, I don't remember one specifically on that, so I will get some kind of an answer to you. But I think the key phrase is reasonably anticipated. I think that's the critical piece. Anyone else? Yes, ma'am, I'm sorry.
Do you have any suggestions for the actual meetings with school committee in terms of fairness of time or how to make sure that everybody's heard, etc.? Is that a well-developed enough question?
It's called norms of behavior. That if the school committee creates, in collaboration with, and it could be with the superintendent or as the superintendent as a resource, but if the school committee creates, these are our norms of behavior, everyone, and I think I had put it up there, will monitor their own voice time, that we will be respectful, that if a new item comes up that needs an immediate action, we will be told before the open of the meeting, not necessarily 48 hours. But create your own norms of behavior. Then, if there's a break, you address it. Have we been, with fidelity, keeping these norms of behavior? At the end of the meeting, the committee and the superintendent says, have we maintained our norms of behavior? And some of that is that, as Patty said, if you're rolling your eyes, or I wasn't made aware of this, with a real sort of anger in your voice, then take a step back. But you need to honestly monitor yourself, and we do it with the superintendent and the administrative team. Do it with the school committee themselves. Create your own norms of behavior.
Can I add something to that too? MASC has a code of ethics that we encourage school committee members to adopt, and it's in our policy manual. Wow, what a shocker that is. And you can find that if you go to our website and go to our policies, and you can pull up our manual online and you can read it. Exciting reading. But go to Section B, because Section B belongs to school committees. And you will find it very interesting, and you will find the code of ethics there. And I don't remember, is it BEC? I off the top of my head, I would think I would know, but anyway, if you go there, you'll find it, and it addresses exactly what you just asked. So we try to take care of you. I was going to say police you, but I don't want to say that. We try to take care of you.
one of you, I don't think it was David, one of you wrote in one of the handouts I saw that a school committee meeting is a meeting of the school committee that's open to the public and not a public meeting. Could
No,
someone-
it says the school committee meeting is a meeting held in public. It is not a public meeting. Okay? I know that's going to ruffle everybody's feathers. Understand that you meet to do the business of the district, and the business of the district involves the students and their achievement. Okay? It's a meeting that you hold in public because the great and wonderful court and the AG's office says you have to do that. It is not a public meeting. A public meeting is a hearing for your budget that you have to have also. That's mandated. You can make it part of the you can make the public part of your meeting by having a policy that says this is what I'm sorry, but that's what it is, okay? You have a policy that allows the public to speak at your meeting. How you write that policy is entirely up to you, okay? But you need to have a policy that says we will allow public speak at our meeting, whether it's at the beginning of the meeting and the agenda, or whether it's at the end of the meeting. My advice to you is do not have it before each and every agenda item, because you'll be there for 4 days trying to figure out what you're doing, okay? And then have the regulation, which the superintendent can write and help write for you, like how long is this public speak time going to be? Does each individual have 3 minutes? Whatever you say, 3 minutes, 2 minutes, 5 minutes. It's entirely up to you and the superintendent. But does that answer your question? That's what that means. It's a meeting held in public. It is not a public meeting. You're there to do the business of the district. Okay.
We do have that policy. It's sort of loosey-goosey, but it is in our policy book.
So this is a very uncomfortable question that I'm going to pose. Term limits. Are there any such thing as term limits for school committee? 4 years, 4 consecutive years of 4 years, and maybe 2 consecutive 4-year terms off time. So I'm just curious.
First, I'm going to
to
say 2 things to you. Your charter, your regional agreement. Okay? That's, that's what dictates term limits. Okay? And that's where you'll find it. And if you want to change it, there's a procedure to do that.
Congratulations and thank you. Okay?